What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The Celestial Compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Biehl. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Biehl.
Greetings, Earthlings. Kathy Biehl of EmpowermentUnlimited.net here with a special edition with a special topic and a special guest and a forecast all rolled up in one. And I brought this all on myself. I am the poster child today for our topic, which is Mercury Madness. And we have with us a Mercury Whisperer who I'll be bringing on in just a second to help us get through the fog. But first, a brief recap of what's coming up for the second half of May. We are at the point in the Himalaya ride on the Midway where Saturn is starting to put on the air brakes, and we're hanging, waiting for when the activity is going to switch. There's a feeling that there's a lot of motion and activity, and yet at the same time a sensation of nothing because of Saturn moving into his retrograde station. He is parked on the degree where he's going to have his second of two clashes with Uranus in the middle of June. So it's like we're getting ready. He's bearing down on that for our next round of stress testing how our communities and structures and new systems are working. At the same time, Jupiter, the most expansive of he's not the most expansive, Neptune would be, but he's pretty darn expansive. Mr. Beneficence, if two are good, why not have six? Bigger is better. Jupiter has slipped into his traditional home of Pisces, where he will stay till toward the end of July. He'll be back next year. And this gives a little more of the unreality, feeling like things are all right, even if you can't quite put your finger on why. And maybe you're just kind of blissfully, happily ignoring some things, but that's okay. There's a softening of the atmosphere that goes with this, and it also adds to the hanged man vibe that's from the tarot, of the Saturn station. And we're moving into toward Mercury's second retrograde of the year, which we'll talk about quite a bit. That formally starts on the 29th. We're already starting to feel the slowdown from that. We have our next round of eclipses starting at the end of the month, and we will talk about those. The first, a lunar eclipse, full moon in Sagittarius, and we'll just peek into June for the solar eclipse in Gemini because Mercury rules it. Mercury will be retrograde, and Mercury will be smack in the middle of the action. And one more thing, the eclipse in June and other planetary movements this month are squaring Neptune, whom I call the cosmic fog machine. So that adds to the kind of escapist vibe, the sense of, let's just keep going. I mean, whose activity level zoomed up crazily in the last weekend? I saw more people that I know in 3 days than I have possibly in the last year, and most of it was outside. Don't worry, I was very careful. But you will notice that there's an uptick in the running around, and yet being like the Red Queen in Through the Looking Glass, running in place, not quite feeling like you're getting anywhere. We will discuss more of this in a sec, but You can refer back to my forecast that is on OMTimes and also at my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for the month of May. And now our Mercury Whisperer will join us, Donna Woodwell. Though Donna attended grad school to become a foreign correspondent, she had no idea how foreign she'd get. After exploring ancient and modern astrological, magical, and mystical practices for more than 25 years, today she uses this wisdom to help folks discover and live their unique genius. Since teaching at major astrology conferences, at Kepler College, and at Astrology Hub, which is where she and I connected, Donna now runs her own school combining astrology and magic with techniques for self-mastery. And she's the author of the Astrology Dictionary, Cosmic Knowledge from A to Z. Welcome, Donna.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Kathy, and thank you for having me.
I'm so pleased. So let's start with talking about a little bit about Mercury in general and what happens when he retrogrades, which is a natural and regularly occurring event, no matter how much certain corners of the internet will try to make you feel like the sky is falling. So, Mercury.
Certain corners of the internet like believing the sky is falling all the time. But, you know, in the case of Mercury, he is the planet that retrogrades the most often. And since he retrogrades the most often, when people ask you the question, oh, God, is Mercury retrograde again? And the answer is probably, why, yes. Why, yes, he is. And
because it happens 3 or 4 times a year.
Every year, like clockwork. And that's because if you think about Mercury, he's this little planet really close to the sun, and he's so close to the sun. He's actually the last planet we figured out how its orbit worked precisely because we needed Albert Einstein to help with the calculations because he's affected by the relativistic effects of the sun. So he's here, he's there, he's everywhere. His speed changes, his direction changes. He is literally the most mercurial of the planet. And so he has to do with what's changeable, what's movable, what's new and interesting. So anything in our lives that's fleeting and fickle has something to do of that mercurial content. And so we associate thinking, the news, pretty much I tell people, hey, I'm a mercurial girl living in a mercurial world, but really we all are. We all are. We are all mercurial creatures living in a mercurial world.
I call him the ruler of gadgets, and getting around.
That sounds absolutely perfect to me.
Now, currently, he's in one of his home bases, all right? He rules 2 signs, which is kind of appropriate for him. And he's currently in his air sign home of Gemini, which kind of increases the duality aspect of Mercury because it's the sign of the twins.
Yeah. I mean, think about a very quick moving object. I'm thinking like a cartoon where something's buzzing around really fast. And so he's got an air sign where he's a little more unbounded and an earth sign where he's a little more constrained. And we can all imagine what that feels like. When he's unbounded, he's, more tends toward the ADD, the flighty, the running from place to place and being curious, as you said, maybe not getting anywhere. When he's in his other home, which is Virgo, that frenetic movement is bound in a 3D kind of way, and so it internalizes the feeling. So we get, the need to create organization and structure, but also anxiety. And as Mercury moves in the various places, depending on how he manifests, he can manifest anywhere on that spectrum.
And to take it back to where he is right now, people can look at this and go, oh, you're being really hard on this influence, but there are some positive traits involved here. I call it short attention span theater. It's the shiny object in Mercury and Gemini, but you can multitask. You can actually entertain a couple of ideas at once. It's like having tea and no tea from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You can have more than one idea in your head at once, and you can be very, very flexible and not get stuck on something, but drop it and run off after something else, which sometimes is exactly what you need.
I have thought about this eclipse cycle a lot and what's happening with Mercury right now. I think we should all be really grateful because, as you said, people in the United States and some other places in the world, because we know the pandemic isn't quite over for everybody yet, but people in the United States are trying to get back to a new normal. We had the pandemic, and we had enough time to get into the pandemic habits, but now we have to break all of our pandemic habits and come up with something new. And when Mercury is like this, the doors are open to try out new things and help break the habits that we found ourselves in. So for that, I'm grateful.
Well, let's look at let's just break it into a couple of pieces here. The concept of a Mercury retrograde and the one that will be happening, which goes from, hold on, I got the dates here, May 29th to June 22nd, from 24 degrees Gemini to 16 degrees Gemini. So smack in the center of his airy home base.
Yeah, and that means that instead of normally Mercury spends about 3 weeks in every sign. So we get a taste of a little bit. He's like the guy running around the smorgasbord going, I like a little of this, and I like a little of that, and on he goes. But he's kind of fixated on his home base for an unusually long period of time. So that gives us a little extra time to process through, what is my need to try out different ideas and different energies. So he's got an extended period of time to do that. I personally find the days around when he's changing direction, so around the 29th and around I think you said the 25th of June. 22nd. Is it 25th or is it 22nd of June? Around the 22nd of June are the days when things are going to get a little crazier than usual. When I mean crazy, I was born with a Mercury retrograde. I have a master's degree in communication. You're perfectly capable of communicating well when Mercury is retrograde. It's just that the message doesn't always connect the way you think it is. And so slowing down a little bit, spending a little bit more time, and building that, I don't know where my luggage went, but it'll get here eventually, into every planning schedule.
And keep in mind also that there are going to be stresses on Neptune during this time. He's going to square Neptune. Venus is squaring Neptune. So that could add to the feeling of your brain has cotton in it or being confused. This is just not, parts of you might want to react really quickly to things, and it might really be to your benefit to entertain multiple points of view and then sit back and see what plays out. Because there are positives always in a Mercury retrograde. It is a terrific time to see things that you missed the first time around, to pick up loose threads, to go, oh, I get a do-over on fill in the blank, to go do unfinished business, paperwork, deal with stuff that's been sitting there that you haven't looked and, you might find things in those piles of papers. I found an outline for a book I'd completely forgotten about cleaning papers this weekend. So, there's no telling what you might stumble upon by retracing your thinking, retracing your steps, retracing communication.
Even going back to your New Year's resolutions, I find that great as a touch base. If you I'm going to clean up that pile this year, and it's almost June, and you're like, wait, the pile is still there. That's the kind of stuff that's super useful to get back into when Mercury is retrograde. If we just did that once every, 3 or 4 months when Mercury is retrograde, we would be a lot less. We would have a lot fewer piles. Let's just put it that way.
It's possible. It's very, very possible. Now, another interesting aspect to Mercury retrograde is ghosts from the past, right? People cropping up that maybe were friends, that maybe were part of a gang that you ran with, out of the blue. Where did this come from?
Yeah, this is why you might want to block your phone. Make sure all the people you don't want to hear from are on your blocked list.
That is even more cynical than I would be. I just get amused by sitting and going, oh, what has come crawling out of the woodwork? Oh, isn't this interesting? But
I'm more of a pragmatist.
Yes. Anyway, you might, but it's not necessarily that you have direct contact. You might dream about somebody. You might have someone start going up, in your social media feed. You might have songs that appear that make you think of something you haven't in a long time. June used to be a traditional high school reunion time. Also, it's a time of weddings. So who knows what's going to show up in terms of old photographs that you stumble on or old letters. Could be very, very interesting. Tons more to say about this. We are coming up on a break. So we will segue from just Mercury retrograde to the role that he's going to play in the eclipses coming in a few minutes.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Life is a flow, and enlightenment is simply harmonizing with the way life really is. Then you find that life is effortless, benevolent, and free of all suffering. Hey everyone, this is GP Walsh, and I want to invite you to my brand new radio show that's launching right here on OMTimes Radio called The Flow of Enlightenment. I've been a spiritual teacher for decades, and my greatest pleasure is being able to share with you these deep and highly practical spiritual ideas. So join me in The Flow every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern and let yourself be transformed.
Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net.
Coping 19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. I'm Kathy Biehl, and we are talking Mercury Madness today with my favorite Mercury whisperer, Donna Woodwell. We've been talking about Mercury coming up for his second retrograde of the year at the end of May in the sign of Gemini, one of his home signs. So just a few wrapping up thoughts about this before we move on to the eclipses. General navigational tips for Mercury retrograde with any kind of special ideas, given that he's in air.
Oh, he's in air all year. Isn't that the case? He was in Aquarius in January.
All his retrogrades are in air this year.
Right. Yeah. And his third one's going to be in Libra. Talk about people coming back from the past. When he comes into retrograde in Libra, that's going to be a blast from the past. I am so excited to start a new normal. I mean, I personally am really looking forward to getting caught up on the things that I've just been like, I'm in pandemic, it doesn't really matter. But it's like, wow, I could try out a new gym. I could go shopping. I could do a lot of things. And I'm not attached to doing any one of them, because I have a feeling just going out and opening up to new possibilities is going to bring things that I didn't imagine as possibilities before. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I like the idea of opening up to new possibilities and not necessarily grabbing onto them, keeping the flexibility and shiny object characteristics of Gemini, because with a retrograde, it's anybody's guess as to whether something's going to stick or not, so just experiment. Might be the good way to approach this one.
Sounds perfect. Don't grab, just go with the flow.
Like, oh, this is fun. Oops, now I'm going to go this way. And so, Mercury is important with the next two lunations, both of which are eclipses. We have the Lunar Eclipse in Sagittarius on May 26th, and then a Solar Eclipse in Gemini on June 10. And for the Sagittarius eclipse on the 26th of May, Mercury has just moved past a conjunction to Venus, both in Gemini, and he's about to go retrograde. His retrograde actually officially begins 3 days later. So he's going to basically be ground to a halt at that point, which adds a prolonging influence to it. So, Sagittarius lunar eclipse, supermoon, right?
Ooh, supermoon on top of it, yes. So it's close. It's at the moon is at the closest place that it can be to the Earth in its orbit, and so it's going faster and it appears bigger. So this is pretty much as large as a lunar eclipse can appear in our night sky. So heck of a show for those in the western United States and the Pacific Ocean islands and the eastern part of Asia. Get the best show. I have a personal best show since it's like right on top of my rising sign ascendant. And these two eclipses, they're potent. I mean, I have done a lot of research on eclipses because I got totally fascinated by the one we had, the Great American Eclipse a few years ago. And they really are drivers of long-scale cycles and our evolution as a species, especially this pair of eclipses, because the solar eclipse, which governs the cycle, is right over top of the North Pole. And that's rare, but anything that's over top of the North Pole has to do with our direction as a collective. So the decisions that are being made now are governing something to do with our collective awareness, which makes it an incredibly potent time for, keeping on track of what's just happening in the news, but also for anybody out there who meditates on a regular basis, this is the time to feed your vision for what you would like the planet to become. I still firmly believe that if enough people imagine a future that we want to live in, that it's creating a template for the world to grow that direction if we're willing to spend the time to do it.
And that actually fits in beautifully with what I see as one of the themes of this particular eclipse cycle in the signs of Gemini and Sagittarius, because I see this as revisiting and resetting the stories we tell ourselves and the beliefs that we have made based on those stories, and seeing the real world impact of the things we say and what we believe, and seeing that the political is personal. It's very personal, and getting to clear out a lot of stuff, particularly on the lunar eclipse, the one in Sagittarius, which is it's ruled by Jupiter and in the sign that has a lot to do with our life philosophy, how expansive our thinking is. And a lunar eclipse is a chapter ending time. things leave under either type of eclipse, but this is much more of the door slamming shut. And then in June on the solar eclipse, it's the reset button or the reboot button or zooming ahead in the next direction. Would you agree with that in general?
I would, and I knew an astrologer who used to say eclipses are like walking across the bridge and then burning the bridge behind you so you can't go back across. And there's something to be said for that especially for those who have planets connected to this particular eclipse. So that's people who have planets in Gemini and Sagittarius, but also Virgo and Pisces, I mean, to a lesser extent, that there's changes being made right now which are bringing you into the future. And you're leaving it behind something, but finally, like, no more. I'm done that pattern. I'm going to go try something new. And you know how we all say, yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore, and then we go do it again anyway? But this is a time where we really say, no more, I'm done with that. And then actually being done with that. If you're willing to let go, because at this point it's just, what are you clutching onto that you don't need? Because the universe is trying to make you let go or encourage you to let go. And it's an opportunity I plan on taking.
A lot of things do tend to leave at lunar eclipses. Relationships just disintegrate, people leave, jobs go, stuff. And it's not out of the blue. It's not like suddenly something goes bad. A long simmering situation hits a point where it can't go on anymore.
Right.
Right.
So they can be very powerful. It's a fiery one. And so it's also, I was looking it up, Eric Francis and some other astrologers call it the nuclear axis because it's all tied up with countries and nuclear power, nuclear weapons and things like that. So it's really potent on the geopolitical scene too, which brings you back to the personal is political and the political is personal. It goes both ways.
It does.
So that some people might find this to be a much more social awakening than they expected. You know, if you have been unpolitical, you might find yourself feeling called to being more in the midst of things and helping to bring in the new. If you've been saturated in the political, you might find that it's time like, you know what, I need to detox from this. So again, there's going to be people going through the revolving door both ways.
And if you choose to work consciously with the energy of the full moon and to do some kind of releasing, this is a time to bring out your inner pyro with a Sagittarius moon.
It reminds me of that Friends episode where the girls set their Valentines on fire and all the fire folks come to put it out and they just go, yeah, there's lots of women in this building setting things on fire because it's Valentine's Day. And so maybe not burn the house down because, you know, it could get a little out of control.
Well, it is important to burn responsibly here. But that's possible. It's possible to do. Another point in time that could be useful for people to look at, since eclipses don't happen in a void, they're on a continuum. The last time that we had an eclipse exactly at the spot in the sky where the full moon will take place on May 26th is May 20th, 2002. So go dig in your memory banks for what kind of gear shift was made in your life at that point. Well, okay, so then as we're 2 weeks later, so we're in this nice little eclipse gauntlet, Mercury, so we have a lunar eclipse, Mercury actually formally stations and goes retrograde, and then chugging along, June 10, solar eclipse at 20 degrees Gemini, which is a recurrence of 6/10/2002. Again, what started or shot you in a noticeable reset all those years ago. So what do you have? What do you see coming with the solar eclipse on the 10th of June?
As I said, it's over the North Pole. It's over the North Pole. It's Lord of the eclipse is Mercury. Mercury is retrograde, not far from the eclipse. That is an awful lot of revisioning the global story. I think that we're going to see a lot of people reconsidering the stories that they've been telling themselves, for good or for ill. And I mean, Mercury is not, I mean, out of planets, Mercury is not known for the most physical, manifested kind of planet because he's so fast and he's so mutable. But I do think so much of what's happening in the world right now is a failure of philosophy. I mean, it's a failure of imagination. Radicalization and polarization are ideas, and so therefore they're governed by Mercury. And if we have a chance to revisit what got us where we are, it might be really helpful as we try to figure out how we can possibly move forward. So as I said, in the short term, I'm not sure it's going to be the most pleasant experience for some people, but I think in the long term, it is ultimately extremely a healing moment. We might find ourselves looking back 10 years from now to this point in time, right after the pandemic, and going, wow, we didn't realize it, but everything was changing right under our noses.
And interesting you say failure of imagination, because the Sun, the Moon, and Mercury will be square Neptune in Pisces at that eclipse.
Yep.
We
will see, and I mean, it's really, I mean, the Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and they're both in the mix for this eclipse season. And Jupiter has just moved in its own sign. There are other mutable planets, mutables like the mutable signs of Gemini and Virgo and Mercury. So this is an incredibly movable moment, as they say. And it's always hard to pin down a forecast when everything's moving, because that's the hallmark of the time, of our changing energies. And I don't think we're going to commit to anything new. I think we're opening up to new possibilities, and we're doing it by letting go of old things. And sometimes we may just know, I know these things revisited me. I know that's what I don't want. But we still may not be 100% sure what we do want until we look at some of the new possibilities that are coming our way. And so I think this is the time when we're just clearing the decks, starting to come out. Kind of like that groundhog comes out, sniffs around, and tries to decide if he wants to come out of his hole yet. We're in that reemergence phase right now. Do we want to actually come out and be in the new world? And if we do, what do we want to create? And maybe looking around the piles and go, I promised myself I would do that while I was in the pandemic, and wow, the pandemic phase is over and I need to come out, and I still didn't do that. What does that say about me and what's important? And am I ever going to do that? Maybe I should just throw it in the trash and be done with it. I don't know. We are going to be doing a lot of evaluating in this process.
Oh, I agree very much so. And I also think it's highly possible that some of us may be jumping the gun on the pandemic stage being over.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you on that, because, we've hit a new high on global things. Well, this gets back to a failure of imagination. And we have so much more work to do globally for this pandemic. We have so much more work to do internally for this pandemic. And yet, I think there is a pervasive feeling in the United States that, it's like over. And even if it's not, and that's part of the failure of imagination and wanting to be done before even thinking things completely through. So what we see in it's easy to forget when you're an astrologer that what we see in the world is actually the real reflection of what is happening in the sky. So we can say whatever we want to say about what the energies, but what's actually manifesting out there has to be in the sky script, or astrology is not as potent as we'd like to think that it is. So the crazy that you see today is reflected in the crazy that is in the sky.
Oh, very much so. Very, very much so. And without going into details here, I'll just point out that there are a lot of Geminis in the news geopolitically, and that June eclipse is going to hit them. I will be giving a talk about this at the beginning of June. So there will be political things happening.
You mean like the president who will not be named? That one?
Yep.
Yeah.
He's one of them. Yeah, and some other people. I mean, Boris Johnson. I mean, there are. It's not just a U.S. It's not just a U.S. phenomenon, but it's
not just a U.S. guy.
No, and I found it fascinating in recent years how frequently Gemini has been represented lately in people who have been framing our stories for us, and especially with all that squaring Neptune, could be really, really fascinating coming up. Okay, so we are heading into our second break here. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
How would you like navigational tools you can use on your own? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, and click the Shop tab. There you'll find lots of talks and guides explaining the big influences at work now, like Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus. You'll also find a variety of guided visualizations for relaxing, clearing your energy, or getting to know planetary archetypes. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. This is Kathy Biehl, and we are talking about all things Mercury, particularly current things Mercury, with astrologer and Mercury whisperer Donna Woodwell. We've talked a little bit about Mercury's retrograde, about his role in the Sagittarius full moon lunar eclipse that's at the end of May, and a big role with the massive solar eclipse, new moon, on June 10. There's one other aspect of that solar eclipse I'd like to throw into the discussion, and that is it's right before the second Saturn-Uranus square, which is exact on the 14th.
a major thing about astrology, it's always cycles within cycles. And it's hard to understand one cycle unless you understand the other cycles that it comes along with. And so we have this Mercury retrograde going on where we revisit our past. We have all this mutable energy where everything's shifting and changing. We have these eclipses where everything is about, doing our shadow work, letting things go, and moving into something new, all in the midst of one of the greater themes for the year, which is Saturn, which wants to be grounded and stable and pragmatic, and Uranus, which wants to break all the rules and break out and be an individual and do something new and innovative. And when Saturn and Uranus are tangling with each other, it's the forces of conservatism versus the forces of progression and what happens when the two of them clash, which is a big story. And so that's happening in the midst. So I have been telling my students through the course of the month or so that, what I already feel the whirl of energy. I mean, I'm so mutable to begin with. I'm always used to look, there's a bird, and going on to something else. So I feel that whirl very strongly. But I know Saturn, as it stations and slows down, is calling you to find a center and find a grounded place, even in the midst of the whirlwind that's going all around us. So I've been suggesting things like, why don't you try moving meditation? It might be hard to sit and meditate when your mind is a whirl, but if you do a walking meditation where you focus on your breathing and the steps that you're taking and your physical environment, that linking to what is in the present, that kind of mindfulness exercise might be the best antidote to being able to handle the rapidly changing world that we are moving into. What do you think?
And that might get you still enough that what you really think and feel about something could find you.
Yeah, emerge.
You could suddenly realize, wait, now go on.
I think that Saturn, in the midst of all of this, because he's stationing now, really the message is, yes, I know it's crazy, but I'm still here. Slow down, and you'll get the best chance of meeting all the new things if you're doing it from a mindful place.
I like the fact, too, that Saturn's in Aquarius, which traditionally he rules, and Uranus is the modern ruler of Aquarius, and one of the features, let's use that word, of pandemic life has been connecting with your friends, Aquarius, virtually, electronically, online. There's that Uranian aspect. And figuring out how we're going to move forward in all this. There's that little wrinkle with it all, I think. Like, what's your role in a community? What are you really responsible for? Are you taking responsibility for it? There could be an aspect with this second square pretty much coinciding with that eclipse of becoming accountable for what you've been doing on a collective level or on a community level, or how you've been using technology. That's probably not the main thing that will come from it, but that's completely a defensible interpretation of that, I think.
I really think, I try not to be too much of a news junkie, although it's hard given that I'm a former journalist. I like listening to the way stories come in and out of play. There's a lot of really heavy stuff going on right now. And given that all things that come astrologically speaking have to work with what is at the moment. So it's like, astrology is like reading a book, and you can't skip ahead a chapter. You're not going to get all new characters. You're going to developing the plot with the characters that you have. And so the characters that we have now is whatever is happening in the world, and we see its natural development. so, right now we've got confusion over the pandemic. We've got confusion over the Middle East. We have pandemic in other parts of the world increasing, continuing unabated. We've got to figure out how our responsibility in providing vaccines is. And I think I would not be surprised if especially stuff going on in the Arctic comes up this summer, because that eclipse is right over the North Pole. That's where the polar ice cap is. We may see one of the lowest ice levels in a very long time, and they know it's coming sooner rather than later. We may see some extra talk about militarization of the Arctic coming up really fast this summer. That is part of this process, part of this discussion. But if we don't have these discussions, if we don't bring them to light, we can't decide what kind of a future we want. So we may see some of that coming back into the conversation. And I guess it's a good time to ask myself, what is my role in this? What is my responsibility? Do I have a responsibility? Do I just trust that there's a divine plan and no matter what I do, it's unfolding? Or is there something I, dare I say, should be doing that I'm not currently doing? And those are hard questions to answer because there's no straightforward answer. It's just that I have a feeling that that's going to be coming up for a lot of people.
And becoming aware of the power of your words and what happens out in the world because of things you say. So I think becoming really aware of the veracity or not of what you're posting on social media could be a theme going on with all this as well.
Yeah, I mean, Jupiter likes to tell the truth, even if the truth is only held by one person. It likes to spit out whatever is in its brain, even if it's projecting its own reality bubble into the world. And we have to learn how to work with that.
Another thing that's another interesting, potentially useful way of looking at this is we've been talking about cycles within cycles. Nothing happens in a vacuum. It's all part of a continuum. So there is the next phase of a story here growing out of two different points in time. One of them is that this eclipse family started up last summer. We had an eclipse in Sagittarius in June, and then November and December last year in Gemini and Sagittarius. So there could be some things coming back around for further discussion and exploration that have to do with wherever these eclipses are falling in your chart, wherever Gemini and Sag are. But there's also the Saturn-Uranus aspect to it, that this is the next phase of stories that got really hot in the middle of February when they had their first square. There were a couple of really big things that happened in the news at that time. There's probably something in your own life each person could look at and go, oh, more to the story. And so then you can also look forward, because both of these little cycles are directing us to the end of the year, because Saturn and Uranus have their final square in December, and the last eclipse in this eclipse family is in December. So that's one way of...
That's the Antarctic eclipse. You know, Arctic eclipses are actually kind of rare. I mean, there are partial eclipses, but there usually aren't total eclipses right over the poles. And people don't get to see them the way that they do when they're at more occupied latitudes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not just as potent in their material effects. And I do. There's a book that Friedhof Capra wrote called The Turning Point that was turned into a movie called Mind Walk, where Sam Waterston and Liv Ullmann and I can't remember.
I've seen it.
Anyway, they're all walking around the Mont Saint-Michel, and they're having philosophical conversations about how we could change to a world with a more holistic vision. What that might entail. And they don't come up with easy answers, but I think they're asking the right kind of questions. Those kinds of questions, I think, are the right ones to ask now. How can we think of a world? How can we build a world that's more holistic, that recognizes it's not me versus them. It's much more of a subtle continuum. We need diversity in order to create. We need diversity in order to create. Let's just leave it at there. We need all the different possible points of view. And until we get there, many of the world's ills are very difficult to solve because we're still fighting fights that are in our heads and not in our hearts.
So this eclipse cycle, or the winding down of this eclipse cycle, could actually literally turn our thinking upside down from top to bottom, North Pole to South Pole.
I think that is fair to say, and maybe give us a more global perspective, which I know, especially in the United States, is severely lacking.
All right. Okay. So one takeaway from this is there is a backwards and forwards energy going on right now with some aspects of existence bringing up things from the past, which we can look at, sort through, go, goodbye, nice seeing you, don't want you. And there's also simultaneously a forward-looking aspect to existence. But nothing is going to be permanently resolved at this moment. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that we are at a point where things are changing, but it's not the best time to make a commitment to what the changes might be. It's a time to explore.
And things will be different. We're still gathering data. We're still thinking things through, considering possibilities. And I like to use the term of a lily pad. The lily pad that we're jumping to won't be within reach until December. So it's a process. So we've got more to come in the process. It's always more to come.
Yeah. The never-ending story. That's astrology.
So how can someone make friends with Mercury during this?
Oh, Mercury is so fun and so generous with humans. Mercury loves humans. It's always fun to just hang out. And really, as long as you are recognizing that, feed your curiosity. Mercury loves being curious. And don't be afraid to explore. Don't be afraid to open yourself up. So, whether that's try out a new food, pick up a new book, do something, walk someplace you've never walked before, whatever. Anything that's new feeds the mercurial spirit in all of us. So it's super simple. Just do something new and see where it leads you.
Look for the humor too, right?
Yeah, there you go. Listen to Kathy. Laugh.
Find reasons to laugh. Mercury likes to, Gemini definitely likes to keep things light.
Well, so does Jupiter. So the two of them have that in common.
Nicely put. Except, okay. So this, when I first was doing my forecast for May, I looked at the month and I went, it's gonna be wackadoodle. And that was my word for it. Like, oh my God. But I think you have analyzed this in a way that there could be some really beautiful little nuggets in all the wackadoodle. So why not just go have fun with it?
I agree. It is wackadoodle, but we're still here. The world has been wackadoodle many, many times before. And yet here we are. So I don't think looking at it with dread helps no one. It certainly doesn't help the collective, and it doesn't help you personally. So you might as well roll with it and play and see what happens.
And speaking of playing, tell people where they can find you and what you're up to these days.
Sure. I am spending full time on my magic school, which is at www.magicandmastery.com. I have a podcast that comes out every Wednesday, and I have a brand new mini course that is just off the presses last week on how you can engage with the moon in a way to learn how to flow with the tides in a much more graceful way and make your own magic. And that is located at www.magicandmastery.com/moon. Super couple hours of training, lots of helpful guides to help you design your own rituals, your own lunar planning guides, and much more. So if you're interested, just go check it out.
All right, so we'll be back in a few weeks, and you can find me at empowermentunlimited.net.